Hello everyone, welcome to our event. I did not realize I was going to be introducing it today, so I'm going to stutter my way through an introduction. I have notes and documents I'm trying to collect and put together very quickly. For notes, I want to begin with land acknowledgement. The University of Alberta acknowledges that we are located on Treaty 6 territory and respects the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant lives. We have a great event for you today consisting of two parts. Our first part, for the first 45 minutes today, is a panel on dysfluency studies. Our second part today will be a performance by Jerome Ellis. This is the first event for our SSHRC-funded project, the Stuttering Commons. I have some notes I will just read very carefully and quickly here before we get started. Just give me 1 second. In 2023, with me, Dr. Maria Stewart, Dr. Chris Constantino, Patrick Campbell, Sam Simpson, Barbara Resnick, Connor Foran, and a host of other collaborators, Joshua St. Pierre, launched the Stuttering Commons, an international initiative interested in promoting dysfluent speech as an aesthetic and expressive value in a culture that demands speed, efficiency, and fluency of voice. Our presentation to you today is one of our first major events for the project. We thought it would be an excellent opportunity to bring together some conversation about dysfluency, dysfluent speech, dysfluent collaborations with a performance reading by Jerome. I will introduce our two panelists and then we'll get started. So first of all, our guest today, Jerome, welcome. We are excited to have you here at the University of Alberta. Jerome Ellis is a disabled animal, artist, and person who stutters. Through music, performance, writing, video, and photography, the artist asks what stuttering can teach us about justice. Born in 1989 to Jamaican and Grenadian immigrants, the artist lives in Norfolk, Virginia, USA, with their wife, ecologist poet Louisa Black Ellis. Ellis dreams of building a sonic bathhouse. Concepts that organize the artist's practice include unknowing, improvisation, inheritance, opacity, prayer, gap, contradiction, aporia, eternity, unpredictability, interruption, and silence. Our other participant today is Dr. Joshua St. Pierre. He's Canada Research Chair, Tier 2, in Critical Disability Studies, and Assistant Professor of Political Science at the University of Alberta here. As a pragmatic, his work seeks to conceptualize and generate resources for radically accessible and hospitable communicative practices. I don't know what else to say other than we get started. I'm super excited about this event. I'm super excited to be here. I'm super excited to have all of you in attendance. And for those of you who are online, welcome. Let's get started. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jerome. Thank you, Daniel, so much for the very kind introduction. I'm very happy to be here with everybody. It's my first time in Edmonton. Very happy to be here. And I'm happy to be here with you, Josh.
Hey.
Hi.
I'm also glad to be here. It's funny that in some ways this idea started in September in London, in a weird little tapas bar.
Yeah.
But there's other ways, and we had this idea, is like, what if we finally did this thing that we've been kind of like dreaming about for a long time, and like got together and had a conversation. But in some ways, right, this we first had this idea like a long time ago, like probably like 3 or so years ago.
Mm.
So I wanted just to say to everyone, we have a starting point for this conversation, and we have some ideas of where this conversation could go. We have some ideas of where to go if it gets stuck.
Yeah.
But it's not like scripted, so in any sense at all. Yeah, but we had this. So we have this idea though for a conversation. Sorry, I'm not sure if my microphone is working. Okay, that doesn't sound good. Okay, yeah. Okay, good. That's good. So the idea for this conversation, we started 3 years ago when we first reached out to each other over email, and we had this, and we have developed this series or this dialogue, I guess, that's kind of been like intermittent over the past 3 years about. It's kind of been based upon. It's been centered around this idea of a clearing, right? That's been really central to your own work in explicit ways, and I think like implicitly it's been important to my own work too. But it's really interesting because we came to this metaphor, I guess, and like with a very different idea of what it means for each other. Do you want to like start about like how you approach that our conversation?
Yes. Well, thank you, Josh. Yes, for starting us. Yeah. Well, I want us to say to everybody that that in my life, as a person who stutters, it was encountering your writing, Josh, in maybe 2018, probably thereabouts. I don't even know how I came across it. It was somewhere on the internet, and it was like really, really, really transformative for me, as I've told you many times. I know. I want everybody to know that. And I read, some of the articles of yours I could find online, and it was like in every article there were so many different ways that you were thinking about stuttering and dysfluency and time and disability and capitalism and politics and gender and justice that were just like so entirely new for me, and it was like, yeah, just very, very transformative. And so I say that because so much of my then even ability to think about stuttering outside of the framework of individual pathology is so indebted to you. So the clearing as a kind of idea, I think for me, I started thinking about, again, largely nourished from your work, started trying to find different ways to even refer to my stutter, or the stutter as it manifests in but not restricted to my body. And I was familiar with the word block. I was familiar with with the word stutter. I was familiar with I was pretty restricted to those two words. And I was like trying to find a different, like through language and through naming it, trying to find like a different kind of approach. And I had been thinking about like the way that often when I am stuttering, or when I am speaking with someone else who's stuttering, I was trying to find a way to describe the way like time can sometimes feel to me like it moves in a different way, and particularly in moments of blocking. For myself, when I'm blocking, I often like stop breathing, and there's this kind of freezing that I experience. And I was trying to find a way to describe it, and the word clearing came to me because it reminded me of like when where I live in Virginia in the States. I grew up taking walks through dense forests, and I had this experience where walking through the forest on a trail, and then you come to a clearing, and still the moment of coming on a clearing has a visceral effect on me. Like the light changes, there's often more sunlight there, and there's different plants, and there might be a place where I might sit down and take a break, eat some of the food I brought with me. And the way that clearing, and the way that it can be very unpredictable, like I'm walking a hiking trail and then I suddenly come upon this space. There was something about that felt akin to how it can feel to me to come upon a stutter in my own flow of speech. So I started calling moments of stuttering, instead of calling them blocks, I started just experimenting with calling them clearings. And then from there, I started wanting to think about as I'm often trying to think about it, intersections between my life as a person who stutters and my life as a Black person. And so I was thinking about practices that Black people have developed in clearings and in woods, as we were talking about just this morning. And something that I started to think about was the way that enslaved people in the Americas and elsewhere, have used woods to create space for themselves where they cannot be seen or heard by their enslavers. And so then thinking about these two kind of forms of clearing together, this like my feeling of like the block in my speech, and then this history of Black life in forest clearings, yeah, I started to try to just like think about them together, which led to questions like, if I, as a Black person, am the literal descendants of enslaved people, and also like perhaps like a spiritual heir of certain practices that enslaved people have developed, including these forest practices. If I have that kind of inheritance, what is, are there forms of practice that that I inherit as a person who stutters? Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard you talk, I mean, in our correspondence over email, you have talked in the past about, in the context of clearings, you've talked about conditions of gathering and habits of assembly, which I think was from Fred Moten, right? Yeah, right. And so, yeah, I'm curious about this question about, so I love metaphors and like this idea of a clearing and the way you've described it as like, for me, one of the things that's interesting is not like the space itself, but like what happens in that space, right? And so even like from going from a forest trail, right, where there's a path of somewhat predictability, you can expect what's coming on, and all of a sudden it just like spills into this open clearing, right? And so there's this a moment of entering this place of potential assembly, right? That is like can be it's overwhelming in some ways, right? It's overwhelming and it's like really unpredictable because this path that was like so clearly drawn is also just like there's just you don't have those kinds of bearings anymore. So I'm wondering, just like so I've often thought about like what happens in the clearing. Like I can understand like the moment from going in the woods to in the clearing. Like I understand that a moment of uncertainty can give way either to reductive fear, I think, or it can also give way to something more transformative. And I'm wondering what you think that thing is, like what. And so I hear you like speaking to that about these other forms of clearings that are not based around visibility but opacity in the same way, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, I've always been curious to hear like what are some of the things that happen in the clearing, do you think?
Yeah, I love that. I love this, what you said, this place of potential assembly. I mean, I love this question because, like, to me, there are two clearings that I have been to, thousands of times in my life. Two of them that like I think about so often. One is when I stutter on my name, and the two is when I'm stuttering on the phone. The first one, stuttering on my name. I mean, one of the things that I find so interesting to observe, and like it can be so painful and frustrating at the same time, is what the other person or the other people do once the stutter brings us into that clearing, and like what they do with that potential. A story I often tell is when I was working at a law library, I worked there for 6 years after I graduated from university, and in no small part because libraries are places where you don't have to talk as much. So I've always worked in libraries as a way to find work that was not too demanding of speaking. And but even at the library, I had to, I had to transfer phone calls, which was really stressful. But there was this one day when I was meeting a colleague of mine who worked on a different floor, and so I hadn't met her yet. And she came down and she said in her hand, we shook hands, and she said her name, and then I went to say mine. And as I usually do, I started stuttering, and we kept holding hands, and it was for me a longer clearing than usual. It was probably about a minute long, and we held hands the entire time, and she waited so patiently, and for me, it was like, like this phrase that you said, like this place of potential assembly, it was like she and I gathered in this way that she very well, may not have been expecting. Like, she might not have been expecting that when she got off the elevator and went to introduce herself. And I was not, I was expecting that there would be a clearing of some kind, that I was expecting that I would stutter, probably. I don't always stutter when I'm saying my name, but I often do. But it's like what is a moment that often is very quick. The introduction, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm so-and-so. The gathering, in that moment, it can be very quick, and routine can be. In this moment was like, it was like the moment was able to stretch and become like a duration of time that we were just like standing in silence, in touch, and waiting. And for me, it was very meaningful, and it was like, it's like, neither of us planned that. And of course, it hits me in a particular way because of all the other, like, it's like, as I've talked to you about, as we've talked about, it's like the clearing to me is also like a palimpsest. It is like a place that has like many layers that have accreted over time. Because I, of course, I've introduced myself and been in that name clearing thousands of times, and there have been many times where the other person, they'll laugh, or they'll say like, oh, did you forget your name, or so I'm remembering, and like my body is remembering all of that. Like, I'm remembering all, like, while, like, every second that she is, like, just, like, waiting while our hands are being held, my body remembers all the times and all the other ways that people have chosen to gather in that moment. So there's that. And a quote that I often come back to from the Haitian historian Michel Rolfe Trouillot, writing about the Haitian Revolution, is he says, I'm paraphrasing, he says something like, the Haitian Revolution was too radical to be formulated in advance of his deeds. And he writes about how, like,
the enslaved folks who were creating the revolution, like the way that there were like limits on even like what they could say about it in advance of it happening, for various reasons. But I often think about that, like just that idea of something, whether because it's radical or for whatever reason, but something, just the simple idea of like an action not being able to be articulated in advance of the action happening. I think about that often in like relation with your question. Yeah, like what does happen or what can happen in the clearing. Because to me, that minute together that we had, I remember it so vividly. It happened years ago, and to me, it is like a very mundane thing, and also to me, it holds it's like a window onto just like other ways of being together. For example, I'm often struck, I think a lot about how like in different myths and stories, there's a lot of weight placed on to the moment when someone reveals their name, like in the story in the Hebrew Bible when Jacob wrestles with the angel. And to me that makes a lot of sense, like names are very important. And to me it's like not strange at all, the idea that one would like wait in silence for a minute before uttering their name. I didn't do it because I chose to, but the fact that the stutter created that moment, I think is very cool.
Yeah, I mean, this is something, I think you describe it in Aster Ceremonies as the ritual of the name, is that right? and that, like, I think resonates with a lot of people in the community, this like ongoing thing that occurs on a very regular basis, right?
Yeah.
So, like, who are you, right? And the question like, who are you, like, what a loaded question, like if there ever was one.
Yeah.
And the idea of like having to like retract the entirety of myself into one syllable is like terrifying in a sense, right? I mean, it is terrifying. And so, I mean, I just love what you said about yeah, it makes a lot of sense to like have a minute of silence before answering that address, you know?
Yeah.
And there's, I'm just really struck by the ways, I mean, the ways in which a lot of activities are preformed. There's a lot of like so much, a lot of preformed habits guide our understandings of what it means to be a proper human being, right? And so there's this is frankly what bores me about fluency is that well, I mean, there's actually quite a few things, but one of the things is like I kind of know what I'm getting, you know. It's like why is one of the reasons I hated COVID is because there was no accidents in the world, really. You know, like these things that you didn't intend to happen. You didn't intend for these encounters, and there's a way in which I think dysfluency makes a lot of more space for those other ways. Because yeah, I think that like entering, I mean, like even as you were telling that story, right? Like entering the clearing and staying is one thing, right? But staying in the clearing is quite another thing, right?
Yeah.
and there is like so much contingency at play about what a clearing can be, right? What can happen in a clearing. Everything can come, I mean, for as strong as it is, everything can collapse pretty quickly too, you know, in like a violent rejection, right? And like a need to assert control within a space of unpredictability, you know?
Yeah.
And I know that there's like a lot of other factors, right? There's a lot of other axes of social identity that can play into how the safety that a person feels holding your hand, you know, or my hand or anyone's hand for a minute, you know.
Yeah.
There's actually like, when it comes down to like these moments where like scripts don't help us anymore, you know, there's like real moments that open up that are guided by deeper things in a lot of ways, you know. And so this I think is how I approach the idea of a clearing is, while you were having like seeing it as like this like sudden openness, right, that gives space for something, as you say, we can't always know in advance what's going to happen. I was thinking about clearings in like, okay, so we had a long discussion about unnatural versus artificial clearings, and then the further we got on, the further this distinction was not helping us at all. But right, but we started from the idea of like, what if, like the idea between a glade, right?
Mm-hmm.
A glade as a form of clearing that you're talking about, versus like say a garden, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I had this idea in my head of like a Victorian garden seems to me at first like to be a very different thing than this glade that one stumbles upon, right? In that a garden is like is a clearing of visibility and legibility that is patterned according to some ideal form of beauty or order or something like that, right? And so being in a garden is like at the edges of the garden is the wildness that has to be continually maintained. And so the garden is like this, for me, is also like this, a metaphor of the way in which fluency is always being reproduced at its edges, like in order to like hold open this space where we can actually identify things clearly, right? And we can say, right, and there is an ambiguity in a force, you know, where like, anyways, yeah, you know, so there's a way in which, for me, I mean, and then there's like other forms of clearings that we talked about too, right? Like there's like a Victorian garden even seems to be quite different as a metaphor for fluency than like an agribusiness clearing, right? Where where it's based around not this like idea of like ideal beauty or reason, but like just like brute instrumental rationality of like I'm maximizing your output and minimizing your input, right? It's like having like high-heeled speakers is kind of like, we do this thing as well, right? But it seems to be like a different form of demand for intelligibility than the other two. So yeah, right. So and so I'm actually not sure how. I don't think we've settled this issue at all.
No.
About like
Yeah.
you know how we're like the same metaphor, kind of, but it can be worked in really different ways. And like it also speaks to our experience, I think, in different ways, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because I'm thinking also, like what you were talking about with the clearing of land to plant a monoculture through the work of an agribusiness. I'm thinking of the I'm thinking about what you were saying about that edge, that edge between the garden and the wilderness, and what you were saying about fluency. In some ways, the way that it works is maintaining, and perhaps I'd also offer policing that edge. It reminds me returning to that moment of stuttering on one's name, like when the other person says like, "Oh, did you forget your name?" as like a joke. I'm curious about that reaction, and in this moment, I'm like thinking about what you were saying about the edge in relation with that. Because for me, there is a dimension, at least that I have felt in those moments when someone says, "Oh, did you forget your name?" Where it's like, there's this like, there's a question that raises for me, which is when, as you've written about, like you've written about rhythms of communication and choreographies of communication, and so when the stutter prevents me from dancing the dance in the way that it usually goes, or the way that the way that fluency might want to mandate. When I like fall out of step, what is the what is the consequence of that? For me, with my coworker, the consequence was like she joined me in this new dance, in this dance that perhaps she might not have been expecting. And when someone says like, "Oh, did you forget your name?" To me, like, part of the consequence that arises there is like, it's like the question, "Did you forget your name?" To me has this it's like rhetorical power is like, to me, the assumption behind that is like, that is very unlikely. So either something very unlikely happened that you forgot your name, or, and then I don't know what the alternative is. You know what I mean? It's like the question to me feels like, it feels to me like a rebuke of some kind, but via, you know, I'm not quite sure how to say it, but it feels in some ways like a rhetorical question. And I wonder what would happen if I said, well, yes, I did forget my name. Like, then what would happen after that? But I'm just thinking about like the rhetoric there and what you're saying about that edge.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm mindful of time. I mean, sorry, I don't want to be mindful of time. This is the thing, right? I'm like, I'm like being caught between two currents now, right? And clock time has its own current than like the duration of this conversation, right?
Yeah.
And okay, so I'm getting distracted, but that's fine. I was thinking about currents actually, and right, and so you talk about this in New York, how like a river is never just one current. There's like multiple currents that are going different ways throughout, right? And at some point, my mind turns to thinking about water instead of just like for the work that clearings do, you know. And there's, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say in that the fluency has like a really strong current, you know, like it has a really strong pull to it, and it kind of wants to go in like one way, right? And it wants everything to kind of go in one way. Yeah, so like I've described it as like a laminar flow before, right? Where like if everything can go perfectly straight, it appears as if it's not moving at all, right? It's just like this seamless, perfect thing. And a clearing is kind of like an eddy in some ways, right? Where there's like an obstruction of some kind in this current, and the water pools back in behind, you know? And it's a really turbulent, and I think the turbulence is overplayed, I think, like with regards to the experience of stuttering, you know? And yet there's something to like the motion of that, right? And the way in which, whether you are caught in this a moment with this person, or whether it's flung out downstream, and these possibilities are just washed out, you know. There's like a lot of things that can happen to underpin of what kind of assemblies are possible, even, you know. So because fluency is not a hospitable environment, like even for able-bodied folk, you know, like, and so yeah, it's rough out there in the fluent world, and I feel bad for them. That was a slightly paternalizing joke, and I apologize. Yeah, I mean, okay, wait. Is there anything? I feel like we should probably close up soon. Is there anything you want to end on?
Well, do we have time to open to the audience?
We have like 5 or 6 minutes if we're going to stay on time.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Well, the one last thing I wanted to say was I was just thinking about like to me it feels like an ableist assumption that I just made, that it would be that like the rhetoric of the question is that it would be unlikely that I would have forgotten my name, because there are of course people whose memories do work in that way. if I had dementia, for example. So I'm also thinking about just like relations between different forms of disability and ableism across,
Yeah.
across the body.
And I
So-
think you're totally right in that. I think I forgot, I was gonna speak that, but then I got distracted by clock time. But, because I think the rhetorical question, I think, is just, is asking actually a different, in my opinion, is asking a different question just with a couple extra steps in there.
Mhm.
So, in my head, it goes something like, so Robert McRiver argues that compulsory able-bodiedness is structured by this unending posing of the question by able-bodied folk to disabled folk. And the question is, yes, but in the end, wouldn't you rather be like me, right? And it's posed as, again, like as a rhetorical question, as if the answer is obvious, right? And so I think, in my opinion, of the question of did you forget your name is drawing the connection between speech and rationality pretty strongly, and they're actually asking you in a coded way, are you intellectually undisabled? And the undesirability of that has already been completely prefigured as well. But I think it's like all those steps are just being packed into that one rhetorical, violent question. But I think it's compulsory able-bodiedness just like all the way down.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Maybe we can open up to if there's anybody who has a question or anything they want to share just in the last few minutes.
Sorry. No, thanks. This question feels rude given the fact that we're stressed about clock time, but I'd be remiss not to ask because I think so much of dysfluency and what you're talking about relates to crib time. And I was wondering if you could just expand on that thought of like what Alice and Kate was talking about, the different ways in which time intersects on our bodies and in particular as it relates to dysfluency in your practice.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, Joshua, 'cause I know the time is tight.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, appreciate that. You want to go first? Oh, thank you. What was your name?
Chelsea.
Thank you, Chelsea. I'm glad you brought up Allison Kafer's work, which has helped me so much, in thinking about various manifestations of crib time, the way that time is shaped by and shaped for disabled folks. I read recently a wonderful essay by the scholar Ellen Samuels called 6 Ways of Looking at Crib Time. And she, in it, is writing about a lot of things, including different, how for her, like what you were saying, Josh, about currents and eddies. There's this part in it where she talks about how she is in her 40s, and because of her embodiment, she looks much younger than she is. So she says that she looks 25, but she feels 85. And she writes about the grief there of feeling like, and she tells a story of being at, I think at a pool and feeling rage when she's hearing a group of elders talk about how they miss being able to do certain things like ski now that they're of a certain age, and she admits to her rage at feeling like, oh, you know, like, I already in my 40s, I can't do these things. And I found her just like her attention to grief. Grief, of course, which brings its own rhythms and cycles and times to it, and the way that for her maps onto all the forms of feeling like her disability places her at odds with the world that she lives in, and that helped me a lot. Just like, yeah, it helped me to like pay attention to grief, and to like in my own life, and the ways that my experiences with crib time have, you know, they have led to many moments that have felt very good for me, like this moment with my coworker, and also moments that, you know, have not felt good or have felt, or that I feel grief about, and yeah, and like how to honor both, and how to honor grief especially, which I find slows me down in ways that can itself be very hard. Yeah. Anyone else? And I'm after I perform too, I'll also have time for questions too, if anyone wants to share anything then too. Oh, that's right. Oh, yes. Thank you everyone who has joined us online.
The question from Janelle is the behavior of an individual asking you if you know your name is aggressive and I think egotistic in nature. Sorry that you have had to experience that.
Thank you, Janelle. Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And thank you, Danny, for reading.
Hi, my name is Nancy. I just wanted to thank you for your talk. It helped me to think back on one of my family members, my uncle, who's since passed on. He had a stutter, and so I appreciate the theoretical framework that you bring, and the idea of the clearing. And I was just thinking about sort of the ways in which family members would always rush into that clearing to finish what he was saying, and that must be a common experience, I imagine. But it was just causing me to reflect on the violence of that, sort of rushing into the space, and how that, I love that story that you shared of your coworker, and sort of just the space that's created as opposed to someone trying to sort of enter in and control what that is. Yeah, so thank you.
I appreciate that, Nancy. Yeah, thank you. And something that just, do you have something, Josh?
No.
Oh, there's something that just came to mind actually was, yeah, I am certainly, I think many people who stutter have that experience a lot of someone trying and often failing to predict what the person who stutters is trying to say. And I'd never really thought about it until you just shared this, but something that is, I think, unique about the name moment is that
it can often, of course, be hard for someone to guess your name. You know, like if I go to a coffee shop and I say, can I have a, and then, you know, the person taking my order might, as they have done, say like a coffee, a tea, you know, but like they might be much less likely to do that with a name. So I hadn't, they just like start with all names and start going through. So I hadn't thought about that before. So I appreciate you sharing that, Nancy. I think that in and of itself is powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I know. I oftentimes feel like that a moment of like trying to rush into the clearing, like it, well, firstly, the clearing collapses down in, right? But it collapses into like a form of like, it's almost like, I've often felt it's like predictive typing, you know, like when you're texting, right? And like, and just like when people like rush in, like desperate to like predictive, you know, like based upon like an algorithmic kind of logic of like, okay, these are the most commonly used words that could be, right? And it just starts from what is common and just like guesses like based upon dominant understanding and things, right? And so it's like the opposite of what the clearing is, right? This because it's not just it's a qualitative difference of going from predictive guessing as a way of trying to like desperately trying to control this thing that's happening, or what is happening here, you know, and to go to having like an ethic that is like that knows what to do with that is attuned to becoming in a different way, right? And you're not just waiting for this person to finish because you already know what they're going to say, but there's like a genuine being with someone in time that is just completely, it's a different thing just altogether, I think so.
Yeah. I have two things to say to that, and I will pause us here if that feels okay for you, and I'll begin the performance with the two things that I just thought of after that. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Yeah. So please go, Josh.
Oh, I was gonna say, are we gonna pause for 5 then?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna pause for 5 minutes to have a break. There's snacks and water and juice outside, and then you can come. Wait, we can't have them in here. That's true. Oh, we have to have them out there. Whew, dodged a bullet there. Oh, and Aster of Ceremonies, we have some copies for sale afterwards, yes? Okay, yes. So just a quick 5-minute break. Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
I realized that I actually don't have any. So,
Oh, really? Okay.
So we just have those 5, and then I can tell people where they can order.
Yeah, the publisher, like, Aster Ceremonies is doing great. They didn't have any more. So they're like, this is all we can get. So we try to get more.